right, so we will record this and then have it, we'll be posting it along with the slides on our website so that people who are not able to join us this morning will still be able to see it. Right. So, Andrea, would you mind going to the next slide?
Morning.
Right. So the LESLLA coffee breaks. Oh, and could everybody just make sure that you are muted? Take a moment and make sure you're muted. So we'll have time at the end for questions, but just wanted to do a quick opening for us. So welcome to the LESLLA coffee break. We started these coffee breaks when we were not able to go to Sweden in the spirit of fika, which is a moment to slow down and appreciate the good things, otherwise known as coffee with friends. So that's when we started those coffee breaks, when we were not able to go to Sweden like we had planned in 2020 for very, very good reasons. So we're something that, even though we came back and we had a wonderful symposium in Tucson this year, we said, we like these and we want to keep going with them. It's a really nice way for us to connect in between our symposium. Yeah. All right, would you go to the next slide? So people have already been sharing, but if you haven't had a chance to share yet, or we've had people, if you shared early on and people didn't have a chance to see who've joined late, if you wouldn't mind just popping in the chat where you are joining us from today. So we always like to know where people are coming from. So I'm seeing a lot of people from the USA, Netherlands, Canada. Finland, and all over the USA, Italy, wonderful. Well, I'm here in snowy Minnesota. We got more snow last night. So my drive was a little bit tense this morning, but we were all able to get here. And see somebody's joining from Germany. Welcome. So welcome everybody, no matter where you're coming from. We are really happy that you were able to come and join us this morning. All right, can we go to the next slide? So the purpose of this coffee break, we have multiple purposes. A big one is to keep that connection going with fellow LESLLA educators. We want to have an opportunity in between our symposium to learn about relative topics from a LESLLA expert. And then of course, at the end, we'll be sharing a few LESLLA updates. So it is my great pleasure, without any further ado, to present our expert today. So we'll be learning about the quest to develop culturally responsive teaching, unpacking invisible barriers to learning. And we're joined today by Dr. Andrea DeCapua, whose work focuses on culturally and linguistically diverse struggling language learners. She's published numerous articles in various journals and is the co-author of 8 books. And her most recent book, co-authored with Helene Marshall, is a second edition of Breaking New Ground, Teaching Students with Limited or Interrupted Formal Education, and that is due to come out early this year. So I'd like to turn it over to Andrea. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera so the spotlight can be on you.
Thank you, Andrea, sorry. We have the same name, but different pronunciations. So I want to thank you, first of all, for the invitation. I have now been involved with LESLLA for over 10 years, and it's been just a wonderful opportunity for me to learn from all of you and also to share the work I've done. I work particularly with Helene Marshall, but with other colleagues. So you know the title of my presentation, and what we're going to do is we're going to start with the picture. And I want you, when you see this picture, just think, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Okay. You can put it in the chat. You don't have to. It's not that important. But I just want you to look at this picture quickly and see what comes to your mind. And I've been having trouble and I don't know why. There we go. Okay. You ready for the picture? Yes? Okay. Here we go. First thing that comes to your mind. Okay. I don't want to take a lot of your time because you're supposed to be, you look at it, you see something. Usually when people see this picture, most people see a frog. Some people see a horse's head. Same picture. So if you see the frog, you would see the eye here, mouth here, back over here, and legs here. And here's the foreleg. Those of you see a horse, here's the whole head of the horse, nose here, eye here, ears, and the mane is the water. So chances are most people don't see both pictures right away. They see one. But it's pretty easy to see the other picture once you have the clue or once you have a little bit of time. And the idea behind this is the metaphor for today's presentation, is that we don't all understand, interpret, see the world in the same way, but we can learn to see other perspectives. We don't have to give up our perspective, but we can see that there's more than one way to look at the world. And so if we're going to have culturally responsive and sustaining teaching, we need to have a mind shift. And I wanted to start with talking a little bit about culturally responsive and sustaining teaching. It's this buzz term. Everywhere you turn around, people are talking about it. But I often have the feeling, what does it mean to people? What does it really mean on a deeper level? And my work really rests on the shoulders of giants, and the giants are Geneva Gay and Recent Alam, the idea of culturally responsive and then sustaining. It's not just a one-shot deal. It's something that permeates our teaching and our educational institutions. And there are 5 principles that Geneva talks about. And the first one is cultural competence. And this group is probably saying, well, we know what cultural competence is. This is what we do. But we also want to take a step back and we want to say, okay, we know it's not holidays and heroes approach to learning, but what does it mean when we talk about cultural competence at a deep level? And today we're looking at those invisible barriers, and we're going to think about the deeper level, or one of the deeper levels. Once we have developed cultural competence, we can develop relevant curriculum. And the relevant curriculum is part of this mind shift, or having this, a different Weltanschauung, if you want to use that term, is that we're looking at our teaching practices and our materials and our curriculum through different eyes. And so we're going to construct something, we're going to adapt it so that it meets their needs. And we're going to have cultural elements throughout that affect them. And again, at a deeper level too. And that allows us to develop a supportive learning community, which, this is what we as teachers always want, as a supportive learning community. But we're also looking at it from the perspective of our learners. What are their needs and expectations about learning that will help them feel part of a supportive learning community and be part of a contributing body? So it's a joint effort to develop this community, this support. And of course, that entails cultural congruity. Again, we don't all learn and understand learning in the same way. And, we talk a lot about, for a long time, the individual learner and individualized learning, but we're taking another step back and thinking, okay, what does this mean at a deeper level? We're looking at prior learning biographies. What does that mean? And finally, we come to the last principle, of course, which is that we have effective instruction. And we talk a lot about effective instruction, but the key to this mind shift is that we're not doing it from our perspective only. We need to understand who are our learners and how do they understand and interpret the world. And we know the challenges that they face. I mean, these are the challenges we're immediately confronted with. Language, the target language of the country, the host country, literacy. This is why they're LESLLA learners. And they need to build up school knowledge, work skills, whatever. Those are the ones they're not inconsequential by any means, but those are the visible, for the most part, visible ones. But we want to look at another one. We're going to look at again, those invisible barriers. And to do so, I love photos, and I like to have photos in my PowerPoint because I feel, again, that there's a lot that's conveyed by photos. And in this one, we're looking at something extremely concrete. A rug is concrete. It's not an abstract concept. It's nothing, but we still don't understand even something as concrete as a rug, or interpret it the same way, because our ways of thinking and learning, our ways of interpreting, our ways of interacting are shaped by our prior learning experiences. So we develop different cognitive processes depending on what our learning environment is. And these are not necessarily the same. They're not less, they're not better, they're just different. So our LESLLA learners have developed their ways of thinking and their ways of understanding learning very differently than what we have. So let's take a moment, think about this. For LESLLA learners, their learning experiences, their prior learning biographies, if you like, primarily or even entirely, depending where they come from, their backgrounds, as outside of formal education. It is, you can just see by this picture that this is a different type of learning than what we think of when we talk about learning in our systems, in our institutions, in our classrooms. It's learning that revolves around the immediate needs of the family, maybe the community. It's learning that takes place as part of daily life, and you participate in the sociocultural practices of the family and the community. It is part of the process of becoming a contributing member, an adult, to use our terminology, but it's regardless of age. And you're learning life skills. It's very pragmatic, very hands-on. It's immediately relevant. You're learning what you need at the moment that you need it. It is based or centered on orality. It's not textbook learning. It's a mentor approach to learning, whereby you observe, you imitate, you get feedback, and a lot of it will be nonverbal, and then you imitate and you practice and so on until you have mastered the skills that you need. And as you can see, it's very, very hands-on. It's part of the real world. Then we come to formal education. And formal education, it's a very different type of learning. And I'm using the term formal education. And a lot of times we also, define it as formal education, Western style, or Western style formal education, because there are other forms of formal education. And we talk about, but what we're looking at here is the kind of education we are accustomed to in North America, Western Europe, and it's really everywhere around the world, and any place where it looks like this. And it's globalized education. And what the idea behind this kind of education is, well, first of all, it takes place in a formal structure. And there are many variations of this, but usually you can go almost everywhere in the world and you'll recognize what is a school, what it looks like. And it's standardized curriculum. Okay, and much of the learning is geared toward teaching students how to learn. And if you think about the knowledge that you're learning, it's knowledge that is divided up into subject areas. Even in the first grades, the very primary grades, you still have even if it's not labeled subject, it's the idea of subject area knowledge. It's learning that is based on or centered on teaching through abstract concepts that are removed from daily life and experience. If you think about all the things you learned and how much do you remember or do you use? Because again, the idea is learning how to learn. It's learning that's based on learning how to become literate and engage in literacy practices to transmit knowledge. And it's also this idea that you're learning how to think in specific ways, and you're doing so using literacy-based decontextualized tasks. And so this is the key here. When I mentioned earlier, informal ways of learning, you're developing specific cognitive processes that are important, that are valuable in that setting. In formal education, you are learning cognitive processes that are essential in formal education and that have become part of daily life in contemporary society. So our LESLLA learners, of course, they have engaged in different types of learning, both activities and thinking. And then they come to our world and then they're faced with these, and I call them invisible barriers because the focus tends to be on, oh, the language they need, the literacy they need, the content they need. And it's hard to tease out that these are completely decontextualized for them and hard to tease out that these are school ways of thinking, because part of that developing that cultural competence is also recognizing where we are coming from and where our needs and expectations and assumptions are rooted in. So let's take a minute and look at what I mean by these decontextualized tasks and associated ways of thinking. So I'm sure you've all seen a worksheet like this. Daily routines, vocabulary. And I'm not saying you like or dislike it, but I'm sure you've seen this. And maybe you've been required to use this, or maybe this is seen as standard, not exactly this one, but something like that. So it's, aside from the fact that you need to know literacy, you have to have literacy and you have to have language. What are you supposed to do here? It's just you're matching one and the letters, right? One, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The numbers with the letters A, B, C, D. So it's has nothing to do with the lives of the students. It has nothing to do with anything except it's just a pure task. And you can look at it. It's almost a recitation. You've memorized something. You know how to fix these up. You might not know how to really read them. You might not know how to what they mean. It doesn't matter. What it's asking you to do is thinking in terms of matching. And this is a school way of thinking, because we don't walk around the real world and say, okay, would this work with that explicitly? So that's just a very considered a basic school type of task. As I said, you need language, you need literacy, and so on, but you really have to have a different way of thinking also. Then we come to one. Now this one is a little bit more involved. Now this is not in English, it's in German, but it doesn't matter if you don't know the language, because you can guess as a teacher what the learner is supposed to do here. You can see, first of all, it's a table. Does everyone see that's a table? Yeah, it's a table. And you can see on the top, there's some abbreviations, and then on the left side, there are photos. And then then you have your table with X's on certain things. Well, the top, you have the days of the week, the work days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And what is the learner supposed to do? Well, the learner is supposed to, you don't have the whole thing here, but match up the names with activities and write sentences and that. So yes, language, yes, literacy, yes, content in the sense of these activities. But when you think about how is this is decontextualized. Not only is it just a sheet of paper and lines and all that, squiggles, but it does have photos. Yet, what is the relationship to the learners' lives? Are these activities that they engage in, that anyone in their family is engaged in? And what does it mean to have a table and interpret the table? First of all, you have to understand what a table is and how to read it up, across, and down. And the days of the week, why are they categorized? And why are they categorized this way? And why are these activities categorized? So the underlying, the invisible school way of thinking here is categorization, and that you need to do something in terms of categorization. So here is another example. One of the popular activity, and we're not going to talk about how relevant really birthdays are for a lot of our LESLLA learners, but very popular is you're going to teach, or they're going to learn the dates and the ordinal cardinal numbers using birthdays. And I'm sure you've come across something like this, something similar. Well, remember, we want to take a culturally responsive and sustaining approach, and we can do better than this. We can do a lot better. These are two different kinds of worksheets, right? One that has has drawings and has some people in it. The other one just has a table, a different kind of a table. Right? But again, we can do better. And how can we do better? Let's take a look and think. We want to teach ordinal cardinal numbers. We want to teach dates. And let's say we have to, for some reason, use the topic birthdays. Maybe we want to transition them into something like this. Well, we can do better. And how can we do better? Well, we can start with surveys. Surveys are incredibly wonderful way to start any theme, any topic, almost any class. And I'm sure many of you used surveys. You can do really simple surveys, thumbs up, thumbs down, smiley, not smiley, pencil, paper, and there are all kinds of tools on the internet and or on your smartphone or whatever it is. What you're doing is you're gathering information from your learners. You're working together to develop questions. Maybe at the beginning you come up with a few, it doesn't matter. And you collect a rich source of data. And then, what can you do? And again, we're sticking with this topic of birthdays. Well, you've got your survey. Now, how complicated, how simple your survey is going to depend on your learners. How much is oral? How much is written? How much is combined? Depends on your learners. Is it just going to be a check? Is it going to be a click? Whatever it is. You can do, but the information comes from your learners, and then you can develop all kinds of activities based on this. So you're teaching, it's relevant in the sense it's drawn from the learner's lives, from the classroom, and you include yourself in here too. You're not saying the year you were born, but just the dates. And you can do lots of things with this material. And I have just a few examples over here. But if you look at, you're practicing the dates, but also guess what you're doing. So pretend I'm Mrs. Aquino. I'm not, but let's pretend. And I want to introduce pronouns. And here's my other student over here. This is Juan, and it's a male. So I'm teaching my pronouns in a context because I'm using my students. And you can line up all the female students and all the male students, whatever you want to do, but you're using them to teach pronouns. And and you can see there's some more examples of that down there. And why that way? Well, think about this for a moment. I mean, there are so many things going on here in terms of these school ways of thinking. First of all, why are dates important? I mean, in contemporary society, you need your date for all kinds of things. And I know, of course, we know that many times our LESLLA learners are assigned birthdays. But why do you need to know your birthday? Or why do you have to have it assigned? Well, you can fill in that question yourself. But what else goes on here is when we're talking about the pronouns, and as in this example, is how do we think about language? Whether or not you like grammar, many people don't, I happen to like it, but it doesn't matter. When we think of language as educators, we think of language in terms of syllables, words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, whatever you want to do. We nouns, verbs, however you want to think of it, because our way of thinking is that language is both a tool for communication, but it's also something that can be analyzed, that can be dissected, that there are discrete units. For LESLLA learners, language is a communication or a tool for communication. The key is to be able to communicate. How important in their lives has knowing what is a verb, what is a noun, and so on, or this is a sentence and this is not a sentence, and all of that. That is something that's developed with literacy, and that part of literacy is also learning to analyze and to separate and to combine language. So here again, even with this activity, you're intuitively teaching them how to think differently about language without giving them a worksheet. Then you can do all kinds of everything. You notice that the last examples before and after. Well, again, instead of taking it a top-down approach, have the students do a little card or a poster, or line them up with their birthdays and let them negotiate, when the birthday is. And it does, again, I want to emphasize, it doesn't have to be birthdays. It's just that this is a topic that comes up a lot. It can be any topic that, when you arrive, when you got, started school, anything you want. The idea is to let them negotiate and to work with material that comes from their lives, has relevance to them, it's familiar to them, and then you're bringing in all these other elements. And then you can go all of the other different ways in terms of the language. You can do other things, and you can do timelines, and maybe you want to introduce historical time. That can be very important depending what they need to do or where they are. You can do other things to introduce them to this whole idea of timelines. Like at some point they may be going out and they may be doing a construction now, and they may be on a factory line. It doesn't have to look like this, but the idea that there's a sequence and there's time, and that things need to be done at a certain time of the year and why, and order things. So there's different ways. What you're trying to do is you're moving them from their way of thinking to what is expected in a learning setting, in a formal classroom, and then also in the work world. So here we come to another very popular topic. I'm sure you've all seen something like this. So a worksheet on the left, and you can see it's basically matching again, right? And then on the right, we have illnesses or problems with the body, health, and they're supposed to use those for the writing, for discussion, whatever they are. Well, let's think about this for a minute. A lot of issues here, right? A lot of questions come up here. And one of the things is, part of becoming literate is also becoming familiar and comfortable with the two-dimensional world, because we know that print, it's two-dimensional, right? You have lines, squiggles, picture, whatever you want to do, however your writing system is, any of paper, that's two-dimensional. They're coming from a real world, particularly if they are very, they're low literate, emerging literacy, and so on. So what we want to do is, they come to this world, they're used to this. Can everybody see this? This is a box, right? Everybody can see it. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can crush it. You know what this is, right? You can do something with it. Then they come to our world, and there's a box. Well, this is a photograph, and it's in color. This is, much easier for them to understand and interpret. But then we come to this, and this is getting a little bit harder. And then we come to something like this. And what we're doing is, we often don't recognize, unless we've really worked with LESLLA learners, is that because literacy is not only the development of reading and writing, but the ability to interpret and understand representational art. If you compare the left, this is my right, the right box on the right, the drawing, and the middle box, they look very different than, of course, this one and even the photograph. And it's a code that they need to learn. And there's been one of a LESLLA participant, Alta Flores, has done some work and published on this about how difficult it is for them to see the representational world. And what's very fascinating is how much work has been done in the pharmaceutical world in trying to get medications that are understood around the world. And basically what is found over and over again is that the drawings have to come from the community when it's low level or emergent literacy. They have to work together, because you can't assume that everyone's going to know the code. And I always like to show this one. Can you do this? Can you label the pictures? You think you can? Most of them? Probably, right? Some might be a little bit harder than others, but you could probably guess that the one on the far right in the middle is somebody supposed to be sleeping, maybe, they can, at the top right, hugging. You can do this. You know what to do. And you might feel these are harder to interpret, but when we think about how difficult it is for LESLLA learners to go from this to the drawings I showed you and then something like this, and we can't assume that any drawings, any representational art is going to be clear to them. we can do better. And we're going back to the health and the body, right? We're going to come back to that, the idea that we're teaching this lesson. So here's an example. Start with the learners. So somebody, a volunteer, a teacher, a student, whatever, lies down and you sketches that person. You have a diagram, but remember I mentioned the pharmaceutical companies and the work they've done, they use the community. Well, you're using your student to do that. Maybe somebody a little bit more advanced can write some of the words and label them, maybe work together to label them. And then they work together to find photos that represent some of the illnesses, the ones that they have, they come up with what's bothering them, what they need to know. And they can have a pocket chart. This one says, for example, health problems, and then they can talk about them with each other. So the material is coming from the students, and you can start very, very basically, like sort the words by first letter, the initial letter, final sound, whatever it is, and then you do a lot of oral practice first, and then you get to the written, and or you'd combine them where somebody's pointing to the word and the students are repeating it chorally. Then they combine the sentences and they put up the word. A lot of the idea of experiential learning where you're physically doing, some of you remember total physical responses, drawing from that again. They can do word bank completion. And then, so we've not only is it not, this is representational art that they're going to be familiar with. You're combining the idea of reading, writing, and literacy practices coming from them. You're also introducing school ways of thinking. Well, why does my head hurt? Why does this? Okay, and what, or for example, down here at the bottom, the blank and blank are both that help us move. Cause and effect can also be in here, or reason. Why does this happen too? Or what are the similarities? What are the differences? So the invisible barrier here is in this lesson I showed you the picture previously. One is the representational art, and secondly, it's not relevant to the student in the same way. They're going to say, who are these people? If you look back, who are those people? And what does that mean? I mean, compare, I'm just going to go back a couple of slides. I mean, compare this, right? And think about your LESLLA learners. And then we click back to this. I mean, what's going to be more meaningful and what are they going to be able to relate to and work more with? And then we can get into a lot of learner created text, and you've got examples here, and you can read about this. This is a LESLLA. It was published in LESLLA by Sarah Cole and Allegra Elson, where the idea of learner created text, LEA, learning experience approach, where the text is co-created. You work together to do something, to create something, and that's the text that's used. And this, of course, is much more involved, but instead of using the neighborhood in the, how many times have we seen texts where they have a neighborhood and you're supposed to talk about the neighborhood or read about it? Why not use the students' neighborhood? Let the learners take photos. I mean, or you walk around and take photos and use that as your basis. So what I've basically done, I've introduced you to the mutually adaptive learning paradigm, also MALP for short, which is a culturally responsive and sustaining instructional model. We used to call it a model, we basically call it an approach now. It doesn't matter. What's important is it's a bottoms-up approach to transitioning LESLLA learners from their learning paradigm, which was developed in a very different way than our learning paradigm. And what we want to do is it's transitional, it's mutually adaptive. So we take elements from their learning paradigm that are essential for them. We take elements that are essential for us, and we combine wherever we can. And what does that look like? We accept learner conditions. For them, it's very essential that learning materials have immediate relevance to their lives. At the same time, we want to remember that supportive learning community. That means that they are interconnected to each other. They have a sense of a relationship. They know who everyone is, including you, as part of that interconnectedness. Our classrooms, we focus on future relevance. learning how to learn, or things like you need to learn this in order to, right? Take the next test, move to the next level, and so on. And there's a lot of focus on independence. You don't really know each other well as people. You may have factual information, like, how many years they were here, how many years they were or were not in school, but it's factual because we see independence is important. And we also want our students to be independent learners. But we can make sure that we always include immediate relevance and this idea of we're going to build that interconnectedness in our classrooms. We're going to put that into our learning, making that idea of effective classroom instruction. Okay, they have a way of learning from their learning paradigm, and we have a way of learning. And we're going to, but ours are essential, theirs are essential for them. How can we combine them? Remember, mentoring, it's a shared responsibility in learning. Also, LESLLA learners almost always come from collectivistic cultures where not I is the center, but where we together work to achieve a goal. But in our learning, we require individual accountability. If they're going to take if they're required, or they have to take some kind of a test, if they have to do a certification, whatever it is. So what we're going to do is in our learning, we're going to make sure that they have many opportunities to work together, and at the same time, they're individually responsible for something. So going back, for example, to the surveys, well, together they come up with the survey, they ask each other the information, and then they can look at the information together, but maybe then they're each one responsible for asking the questions and getting some information. Or you can think about how that can work. And the oral transmission with the written word, well, all of you are very versed in kinds of literacy practices that they need to do. And we are going to make sure that they have many opportunities to leverage their strength, that's orality, while they are engaged in learning literacy practices. So lots of combination of using strategies that were developed in primary education, but age appropriate, but so that they learned to become comfortable with the written word. And finally, this is where we come to those invisible barriers. We're going to target these decontextualized tasks. We're not going to assume they know how to do a task because they know what we have taught them the language, or we have taught them the content. We're going to assume that these decontextualized tasks and these school ways of thinking, now, they are unfamiliar, and that even if they've been introduced them, you don't learn these overnight, especially when you introduce new content and new material. We take a step back. We always introduce these tasks using familiar language and content. And here's where we can bring in the multilingual skills or the translanguaging. It doesn't matter which language they use initially, because we want them to become comfortable with the task and with the requirements of the task. And then more and more, we introduce the target language, and we introduce the content and so on. And then we can expand. So that is MALP in the mutually adaptive learning paradigm in a nutshell. We kind of entered it from that direction. There is a teacher planning checklist. This has undergone many revisions. Some of you may be familiar with an older revised version. This is the newest version. As Andrea mentioned at the beginning, Helene, Marshall, and I, our second edition of Breaking the Ground is coming out in the late spring, and you will see the latest in there. It's also available, or it should be available by now, at malpeducation.com, the MALP website. And there's been some change. We always learn from our teachers, our colleagues, on how to improve things. So we're always looking, that's why you'll see differences here. But you'll notice it follows the model. The approach, you've got A, accept conditions for learning, B, combine processes for learning, C, target new activities for learning. And then you have sentences that ask each one, and you're supposed to look at your lesson, your class, or your plans, whatever it is, and evaluate them, or use it for planning. So it's for planning and reflection. And you can't just say yes or no, you have to kind of explain. And doing that, learning to reflect, going back to becoming culturally competent developing relevant curriculum and effective classroom instruction, and making sure there's cultural congruity. That's going to come about through this reflection in many ways. So I think we might be running out of time. So I just want to mention very briefly cooking. This was really popular for a while, and then everybody said, no, we don't want to do any cooking, in terms of learning recipes. And then we've come back to it because it's, if you think about the mutually adaptive learning paradigm, culturally responsive and sustaining instruction and invisible barriers, what can you learn through sharing and recipes? Well, obviously, you can do all kinds of content here. You can do science, right? And these school ways, and I put in parentheses academic ways of thinking, because you'll notice in a lot of my writing, I talk about academic ways of thinking. Think about all the things you can do with learning. Of course, you've got learning how to, think about a recipe, even if they don't, chances are, these are LESLLA learners. They don't cook by recipe, and many of us don't, but if you're going to do a recipe that other people can follow, what are all the things that have to be included in there? And that's school ways of thinking, to the ability to replicate it. So I'm not going to go into great detail. I'd like you to think about looking at the checklist again, looking at the MELT model and things I've talked about today, and think about all the school ways of thinking that can be practiced, developed, maybe mastered through this decontextualized test of preparing a or multiple recipes. And on that note, I'd like you to think about how you can work at making the invisible visible, using, having this culturally responsive, sustaining mind shift. And here's some examples, of common classroom tasks. And we're not going to go into it. This is for you to time for you to think about, not that time. This is an opportunity to think about some of the things that you do. And I'm sure there are many, many more, but how might you reevaluate them, thinking about what are those invisible barriers that I hadn't thought about or that I did not make explicit for my learners, and how can I introduce them and practice them using familiar language and content. So on that note, I think we should have some time for discussion.
Absolutely. We are doing great on time. And yes, the recording will be made available on LESLLA's website along with a PDF copy of the slides will be available on our website today as well. And now just opening it up for questions, comments. There was a pretty active conversation going on in the chat around birthdays. And I just wanted to say, Andrea, I remember in Pittsburgh in 2019 going to your presentation on MELT and walking out feeling like my mind had been expanded. And what a help it was for me for thinking about teaching LESLLA learners. So just want to say thank you again for all of the work that you've done in this field.
I noticed somebody said we might accidentally assign the wrong pronoun. I didn't really follow the chat, obviously, when I was presenting, but one of the things that, because you're using your learners in the classroom, that if somebody accidentally assigns the pronoun, that's half the conversation. That because they can, it's hands-on, it's visual, they can get a laugh out of it, they can chuckle. The correction isn't, again, necessarily top down, it's coming from them. And all of that idea of the supportive learning community and developing interconnectedness, like, again, that like, as I said, and I think probably many of you commented on this, they're all coming on they're all assigned January 1st if they're refugees, but it doesn't have to be the birthday, but it can be their children. It can be, as I said, other things like the day they started the school here, whatever. It's important, whatever it is, it's what comes from them. And you can do the same activity multiple times using different sources of information. Again, it's not only, you don't learn the numbers, the dates and everything so quickly, and you're learning the months. You can think of all those other things and before and after he and she, we need to recycle information so you can practice our grammatical structures or, the sense of time, but let's get it from the learners. And if you do have to use a prescribed curriculum, prescribed text, you can start with something like this first. Think of it as a ramp into what you are required or you are mandated to do. Because if you're not giving them the ramp, you're setting them up for failure. You're not recognizing, you're not developing, there's not really cultural congruity, and there's not relevant curriculum initially. You have to start with them.
Okay, thank you for that really concrete metaphor, the ramp into what is expected to be taught. Right. So if people would like to unmute or put questions or comments in the chat, I see from Teresa, a colleague calls it the limousine of support. That is delightful. Right. So if people have comments, if people have questions, Andrea, maybe you want to go back to that previous slide where you had prompted people.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
To think about what kind of school ways of thinking underlie common classroom tasks. And I see Anne-Marie shared the melpeducation.com checklist in the chat for people. I know people were excited about that.
Is it the new one? It might.
It's the one from your website. While you were talking, I went to your website. Is that the right one?
I'm not sure if Helene uploaded the latest version. I can take a quick look at it. Well, no, this is the chart. Yes, and this is. Yes, she did. She did. She uploaded as I said, we just turned in the proofs a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago. So I'm going to stop. Do you want me to continue sharing? I stopped it, but do you want me to go back to that? Yes, you wanted your slides, right?
Okay, I can go ahead and share next. So
okay, why don't
why don't we do a chat without slides for a little bit? And then when we're ready for the announcements, I'll just share my slides.
Yeah.
So there is
a question.
I find
it distracting to have slides there.
This can be more of a conversation. So question in the chat, what are some techniques for getting learner-generated texts from students with very limited speaking and listening skills?
Well, again, it depends on your group and what they have. But one way to start, and I'm thinking of a class that I worked with where they had very limited language, and they were very low language and low literacy. The teacher brought in photographs of herself, and they were, she had printed them out from her phone, but some photographs of herself, of her family, her mother, her father, herself, and her son. And she just said, she showed the photographs and she also said, my mother, my father, instead of doing, the traditional family tree. It was very simple. It's only a few. And then she had them, in this case, some of them were able to produce photos of their family. She knew her students. You have to be careful. Sometimes they don't have them, or they had traumatic backgrounds where they don't want to do their families. But she started out with her family and introduced mother, father, son. And she was also the daughter of her parents. So there was only very basic vocabulary, and then she had a few sentence frames where they practiced the sentence frame. So so that's one way to generate information. Or the one slide I showed that the teacher used, they found photos on the internet of things, of how they cooked or food they ate. And that's another one. Finding, if they had the resources, to find it only has to be one photo perhaps of something they eat for breakfast. There was some great examples that I've seen in classes where the when they're practicing, you know how you do the routine for breakfast, I eat blah, and for lunch I eat this, and dinner I eat that. And instead of doing the book where they have the choices and the photographs, the teacher brought, showed photos of what she did, or actually brought some things in, and they did the same thing. So it doesn't have to be a lot of vocabulary, it doesn't have to be a lot of language, and you're working with frames. It has to be very simple, and you can start out with oral. You can bring in 3 pieces of fruit, and you can say, I don't like. And I like the banana, I don't like the orange, or something like that, So but you want to, and the teacher who did the cooking, they didn't cook in class, but she brought in props. She brought in photographs, cut out thing from, she brought in props from her kitchen so they could pretend, so, and plastic fruit and vegetables. So if you can be creative and think about, what do my students have access to? What would mean to them? And usually there's something that they can do. And I just thought of another thing. In a class I observed where they started with hobbies, one learner who never said anything, ended up learning the word whittle, whittle like carve, because it turned out he had learned to whittle from his uncle. And that's something that you normally would never find out from a student. And then he brought in the pieces he still whittled. So you get a lot of material from your learners if you have this mind shift. Not how am I going to start with what I need to do, but what do they, because they come with so much knowledge and experiences that we need to and want to leverage. And that's hard for us to do because we're used to, even though we think we're being culturally responsive, or we think we've engaged in a mind shift, we still start generally from our learning paradigm, formal education. We have to move away from that. It's really, really hard to do. And,
Mhm. Okay. What a valuable reminder to all of us. Right. So there's some more suggestions that have come in the chat, such as taking photos of the students in groups, such as the men, women, individuals, old and new students with their flag. So good activity for introducing pronouns.
yes. Yeah.
Also in the chat from our November holiday in the US, brought a mini oven into class and made cornbread and then wrote about the recipe. So food recipes made and eaten are fun to write about, and you can use pictures of the process and work through various recipes and the cultures. So some good ideas coming in.
And I'd just like to mention that the ideas that we're given here, these are all building a truly supportive learning community, that idea of interconnectedness, where they really learn about each other too and feel comfortable.
And that comfort is so important, to be able to take the risk and make yourself vulnerable the way that you do when you are learning to speak in a new language and learning to read and write in a new language, especially for the first time. Okay. All right. Well, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody, and feel free to keep sharing ideas in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can move through our final LESLLA announcements. And Teresa, could I invite you to talk about the discussion group on home language use?
Sure. And this discussion group on home language use in literacy LESLLA context is actually filled up. We had a lot of people sign up, so registration is closed, but I want to recognize Aya Katrina Alberg, who's here with us, and Haida Schmuck-Wrigley, who have put together this monthly discussion group. And I don't know, as it's so popular, maybe we'll look at having future discussion groups again in the fall on this or other topics. So yeah, so thank you, everybody.
Right, and just letting people know that there is a call for papers for virtual information session, submitting to the LESLLA 2022 proceedings. So in particular, this is for colleagues who presented at the last LESLLA symposium and want to write a paper for the proceedings. And it's happening on February 15th, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. GMT, 6:30 p.m. CET, and 9:30 a.m. believe that's PST. And then, of course, the very exciting news, the LESLLA 2023 symposium is going to be happening in September in Barcelona, Spain. Within the next week or so, we should have the exact dates for people. So you can go ahead and reserve that on your, set that aside on your calendars. But we are just over the moon and so excited to be able to go to beautiful Barcelona and gather together. So quick question, and just wanted to open it up to people in the chat. If there's any other LESLLA related news that you would like to share, please feel free to put that in the chat. And while you are doing that, I'm going to actually pop in the chat a link to a Padlet, because we are always looking for other topics and presenters that we can invite for our LESLLA coffee breaks. So if you have ideas of topics that you would like to share, please go to this Padlet. And this is our first time showing this Padlet. So we're excited for people to be able to start to give us these ideas. And what you'll do is on the Padlet, there is that little pink circle that's going to be in the lower right hand corner with a plus sign on it. And if you click on that, then you can add your ideas and your suggestions for topics, for presenters. We really want to hear from you. This is where we get our ideas for coffee breaks, is directly from participants in other coffee breaks from the LESLLA community itself. So thank you for giving us your ideas. We really appreciate it. And I'll be sending out, once the recording is up online and the PDF of the slides are up online, I'll be sending out an email to everybody just to make sure that you know where to find that on our website. And I'll also send out this Padlet link if you don't have a chance to fill that out today. But yes, please do share. We really want to hear from you. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks for coming to our coffee break, and stay tuned. Our next coffee break will be happening, we'll meet in March. So follow us on social media, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Become a part of our LESLLA Facebook community to be able to get all of those updates about what is going on in the LESLLA world. And a huge, huge thank you to Andrea for joining us today and sharing all of her knowledge. We really, really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to be able to come here and gather with us today and share your expertise.
Well, it was my pleasure. And again, I'm always interested in hearing what thoughts and ideas people have. And you're always welcome to email me or contact me otherwise.
Okay. Would you want to put your email in the chat, perhaps?
Sure. It's
Okay, and I
also
hope
on the PowerPoint.
Oh, great. Oh, great.
No.
Okay. And I don't know if you're able to see the chat. There's just a ton of thank yous coming in for you in that.
Oh. Well, thank you. I thank all of you.
And I think this is the first time we've had an Andrea and an Andrea on the same Zoom call. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.